Oh, you guys totally skipped that. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Sorry about that, guys. My mic was muted. Um, it's Tuesday, February 28th, 2023, and I want to thank you all for tuning into another show and for another broadcast. Um, Again, I'm glad that you all have had an opportunity to stick with me during this month. I've been on a little bit of a hiatus, so I've been pretty busy preparing for a new job. Just in case people don't know, I will be starting a new job with the Carroll County Health Department next week on Wednesday, March 8th. I'm very excited about that. I've been busy, preparing for that and for this next chapter of my life. It's really an honor. It's a humbling experience to get to work in a new role and in a new capacity. So I'm just really glad and thankful that this opportunity has opened its door for me. I'm blessed to just be a part of something fantastic. And I'm blessed to just have an opportunity to, again, serve the community and make an impact in so many ways. So again, I wanted to, I know it's been a while, so I'm going to provide you guys with the answers to the Black History Month questions from the past few weeks. But before we do that, I want to let you all know that we have a very special guest that we will be speaking to in about 8 minutes. She is the Maryland State Delegate, Mary Lehman, who represents District 21 in the Maryland House of Delegates. So she will be joining us momentarily. But I want to provide you guys with the answers to the Black History Month questions for a few minutes before we officially start the show and start the interview. So, when I last spoke to you guys a couple of weeks ago, I gave you all one Black History question about a prominent figure. And I mentioned to you all that she was born April 27th, 1927, and that she passed away on the 30th of January in 2006. And of course, she was an author, activist, and civil rights leader. She was married to Martin Luther King Jr. until from 1953 until he was assassinated in 1968. And she, of course, was a strong advocate for African American equality and was a leader in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And she played a prominent role in this movement, especially after her husband's assassination. So I mentioned a few details, a few important details about what she advocated for and what she stood for. So this answer to this question is Coretta Scott King. So I'm sure you guys had a chance to look at that um, and really figure that out. It wasn't too hard, but I just wanted to throw something easy in there since it is Black History Month. Today is actually the last day of Black History Month. It really went by quickly. I'm excited to see what's in store now. And let's see. My next question is okay. There's another prominent figure. Um, she was an aviator. She was the very first African American woman and first Native American to hold a pilot license, and she was the first Black person to earn an international pilot's license. And she was born to a family of sharecroppers in Texas in 1892. She was born January 26, 1892. And she passed away on April 30th, 1926. Again, she was an American civil aviator. She developed an interest in flying early on in her life, but for African Americans, Native Americans, and women, it was very difficult for flight training opportunities to take place in the United States. But again, she was able to overcome that after working in a cotton field at a very young age and after studying in a very small segregated school. She was able to attend one term at a college, at Langston University. So this prominent figure, I just want to give you all, I just wanted to provide you all with some hints. This is Bessie Coleman. So Bessie Coleman is the prominent figure that I just described. So we have Bessie Coleman, we have Coretta Scott King, and we have another gentleman that I think that everybody should be familiar with if they follow this work. He was an American civil rights lawyer and jurist who served as an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1967 until 1991, and he was the Supreme Court's first African American justice. And he was a prominent figure in the civil rights movement, and he led the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, an educational fund, and he was a prominent figure in the movement to end racial segregation in schools. And he won 29 out of the 32 civil rights cases he argued before the Supreme Court, which culminated culminated, in the court's landmark 1954 decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which rejected the separate but equal doctrine and held segregation in public education to be unconstitutional. And President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed him to the Supreme Court in 1967, and he became increasingly conservative once he was elected to the bench. He was born here in Baltimore, Maryland, went to the Howard School of Law after he graduated and attended Lincoln University, and he was even mentored by Charles Hamilton Houston, who taught his students to be social engineers in the field of law. He opened a law practice in Baltimore, but soon joined Houston at an NAACP in New York, and they worked together for years. And he served in many other capacities, but I think you guys know who this prominent figure is. This prominent figure, is Thurgood Marshall. So I hope you guys had a chance to really, again, dig deep and learn more about our culture and learn more about our history, because it's very important. Delegate Lehman is going to be joining us in a few minutes to talk about her work representing District 21 between Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County. She's going to speak to us about her public service, about how important it is to be active and involved in the community. She's going to be speaking to us about the committees that she serves under in the House of Delegates. She's also going to be speaking about how she got to where she is and what really inspired her to really fulfill this role. But last but not least, we have one last figure I want to speak about. So she's an African-American actress, singer, and dancer, and she was the first African-American film star to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, which was for her first performance in Carmen Jones in 1954. She also performed as a vocalist in venues at the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater, and she also performed in other roles. And she, of course, she was also portrayed by Halle Berry. So she was born on November 9th, 1922, and died on September 8th, 1965. Very prominent figure, and she was 42 years old in 1965. This is Dorothy Dandridge. So I hope you guys had a chance to really, really, again, dig deep into the history and to really dig deep into, the Black History Month. I know that it comes every year. We talk about it, but again, we want to take it seriously. We want to learn about our history because it's important to our foundations as people of color and as people who live in this world. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys, since she's waiting, I'm going to introduce you guys to Maryland State Delegate Mary Lehman. So again, Delegate Lehman, thank you again for agreeing to appear on my show and appear on my broadcast to talk about your work. I'm glad that you were able to take time out of your busy schedule. I know that you guys are still in session. So it's I know it's been pretty busy for you guys, but I wanted to take a different approach and really, really learn more about some of the other counties in Maryland. I've worked mainly with a lot of legislators at the state, local, and federal level, but I've mainly worked at the state level and at the local level with the city of Baltimore and with the county that I reside in, which is Baltimore. But I'm not really too familiar with Anne Arundel County or Prince George's County. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of led you to, representing the district that you represent now, which is the 21st district?
That's right. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, yes.
Great, okay. So the road into politics, elected office has been an interesting one. I actually, my first career was in journalism. So I have English Lit and journalism degrees from the University of Maryland College Park. And of course, there's a nexus between journalism and politics that had always interested me. I grew up in a very political family in Greenbelt in Prince George's County. And when I say political, I mean mostly my mother was a big community activist, and she was active in a number of issues, including fair housing, helping to integrate Greenbelt in the 1960s, at a time when it had a still had a sunset policy in place, which means that people of color, African Americans in particular, were required to leave town at sunset. They could not reside in Old Greenbelt. Were not really welcome except, during the day if they were there to work. That law was not uncommon back at that time. I know other jurisdictions in Prince George's County, Hyattsville, and others have the same law. But my mother was a native of New York City, and I met my father in the U.S. Navy when they were both stationed in San Diego. He had grown up in Greenbelt and always wanted to return and raise a family there. And, my mother being from New York and being the daughter of immigrants, being a first generation American, was kind of appalled to learn that Greenbelt was not open and welcoming to people of color. And so she got active in fair housing, and then she just became involved and engaged in a lot of other issues, including land use and zoning and other sort of social justice causes. And she eventually, when I was in college, ran unsuccessfully, actually, for city council. She was very disappointed, but we said to her at the time, some people are meant to kind of be more like agitators and activists than they are in elected office. But she inspired me, inspired actually all of my siblings to kind of give back, be involved in the community. But I would not have imagined, I guess, a career in politics for myself until I took a break from journalism when my oldest daughter was born, and ended up staying home for 5 years with my oldest, Allison. And then when she was 2, I had twin boys. So I had, 3 little ones, and took time off to be with them. And then eventually decided when Allison started kindergarten that I just felt ready to return to work. And so my husband was very supportive. I didn't think journalism made sense then at that point because the hours were so long and the pay relatively low. And kind of by accident ended up working for my county council member. I saw him at a community meeting and sort of said on a lark, I actually wrote him a note and passed it around the table and said, do you have anything I can do in your office? I've been home with the kids for 5 years now, and I had known him well and actually helped him run in a special election for county council when his predecessor had died unexpectedly his last year in office, his 8th year in office, creating this vacancy. So Mr. Dranoga, Tom Dranoga is his name, when I saw him at this meeting, said, actually, I could use some help working, specifically someone to work on school issues, because at that time in Prince George's County, this would have been in 2003, the state legislature had actually gotten rid of our elected school board for a period of 4 years. They replaced the elected school board with an appointed board, and Mr. Dranoga was getting a lot of calls and emails and concerned, parents and PTA leaders saying, we need help on this or that issue. It might have been an educational, like classroom issue, academic issue. It might have been a building issue or bus transportation issue, but they didn't have an elected board they could turn to, these families for help. And he didn't have the staff to dedicate. He had a staff that dealt with a lot of other issues, but he did not have a designated staff person to deal with school issues. So he asked me to do that. And I said, sure. I don't pretend to be an expert on school issues. My oldest is only in kindergarten, but surely I can learn. So that was my first job in politics. And I did that until our elected school board returned 4 years later. And then one of my state delegates, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, who is still one of my delegates, I'm so honored to serve next to her, she hired me to work for her in Annapolis. And she's the person who became, not only my boss, but my very good friend and mentor. And maybe 6 months into the job for her, she said, you need to run for office. And I said, I don't think so. I don't see me doing that. But she was insistent. She said, no, really, you know the neighborhood, you know the issues, you have kids in the school system, you would be a natural. And I said, well, what would I run for? And she said, well, county council, because we have term limits in Prince George's. You can serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms, and then you have to leave office. You can come back if you sit out for 4 years. So there's a little bit of a loophole in the law. But Mr. Dronoga at that time was reaching his, the end of his second 4-year term and had to vacate the office. And, my response to her was then, well, okay, I guess I could consider that, but I don't know how to do it. Like, I've never run for anything before, and I don't really know how. And she said, I'm going to show you. I will show you how. And she did. She, helped me set up my campaign office and, kind of showed me this is how you do it. You get information from the party. I'm a Democrat. And so she said, the Democratic Party provides you voter information, and, you create back then, it was mostly done on paper, walk sheets to knock on doors, and you start by targeting like your highest, your what you call super voters, the voters with the highest those that are going to turn out, because their voter history. You don't know who they vote for, but you know how often they vote in primaries and generals. The party captures all that information. So you target what are called super voters first, because the other ones are, based on their history, are most likely to come out again. And then you kind of go from there. You go on down the list and you go door to door, or you get volunteers to help you, because it's hard to hit every door. But she really just sort of held my hand through all of that, was very supportive. So it was an open seat, a 5-way race, and I won. So I was on the Prince George's County Council for 8 years, and then lo and behold, I was term limited. And it just happened that in my final year in office on the council, which was 2018, that one of my 3 state delegates decided to retire, which created an opening. There are no term limits in the state legislature. So Delegate Barbara Frosch, who was, a wonderful, an environmental expert, really. She spent, I believe, her whole career on what was called the Environmental Matters Committee at that time. Now it's called Environment and Transportation. But she did decide to retire after 20 years, and I went after that open seat. And I forget how many candidates there were. There were 3 seats that, are open every 4 years. In our district, we have 3 delegates and 1 state senator. Districts are different. A lot of them are 3 delegates and a senator. Some are 2 delegates or even 1 delegate. You sometimes have a split district that's A, B. But District 21 is a 3-delegate district. And again, Delegate Pena was very supportive and very helpful. Only this time, because I had run 2 previous campaigns, I knew what to do. So it was, a little different, because the state considers different issues, a broader range of issues, issues that you don't deal with at the local level, like reproductive rights, for example, like LGBTQ issues, gun issues. And there are some others, but what was really fortunate for me was that the county council district I served in northern Prince George's County overlapped the state district that I was running for by about 65%. So a lot of the people that I was, asking to support me were the same people who lived in my council district. And if they hadn't supported me before, they at least knew my name. They had seen me, they had interacted with me, they had come to, maybe one of my town hall meetings. So that was extremely helpful. And of course, what was definitely different about the state district is that, as you said in your introduction, a portion of my district is in Anne Arundel County. It's only a little bit under 20%. So it's a little, it was my first 4 years, the district split was 78%, Prince George's, and about 22% Anne Arundel. And it's dropped under 20% in Anne Arundel and gone a little over 80 in Prince George's, but the district has on the Anne Arundel side, contracted in some areas. So we have less of some areas, but more of other areas. Like a little sliver of Crofton actually got added to the Anne Arundel portion of the district, along with Odenton and the Piney Orchard area of Odenton, and a little bit of Gambrels, and a little bit of Laurel, the Anne Arundel part of Laurel. In Prince George's, the district starts at the University of Maryland College Park, goes all the way up the US 1 corridor, if you're familiar with that, through Beltsville, which is an unincorporated area, a little bit of Adelphi, and then where I live, Laurel. So the city of Laurel, and then the unincorporated part of West Laurel, which is where I reside. And have for 32, 33 years. And that is Prince George's, but outside the city limits of Laurel. So, but same zip code. So that's how I made my way from journalism into politics.
Yes, and I thank you for elaborating on that. It seems like you've been able to accomplish a lot. Walking into this process and walking into this world of politics and this world of public service, it seems like you've been able to learn a lot from your colleagues and from a lot of people who are a part of your network. And it's interesting because she is going to be a part of my broadcast next month. So it'll be a great opportunity to speak to her and to really get to know her a little bit more too. So she's going to be appearing on my show next month. So I'll stay tuned to that. So I'm glad that you were able to mention that because I just talked to her staff not too long ago and I already set that up. So it's great that you work closely with her and that she's been able to assist you in your journey as well. And thank you for talking about some of the differences between Anne Arundel County and Prince George's County. I know that you said that you were on the committee that is responsible from my understanding, you said that you were on the committee that was responsible for House, Environment, and Transportation. So I've learned a little bit about the environment, of course. Like I mentioned, like when I first introduced myself to you, I was an intern and I worked at the Maryland Department of the Environment under the
Mhm.
Poison Prevention Program for the state of Maryland. That's my state experience. And then in terms of housing, I had a chance to, as an intern for Senator Cardin's office, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development was one of the agencies at the federal level that I was able to work closely with when I was able to speak to constituents and help resolve their issues. And even with the transportation piece, I've worked at the local level with the MedStar Health's House Call program with seniors and in the field of geriatrics. So could you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done on that committee? And because I've spoken to a lot of your colleagues throughout the years about the work that you guys do on different committees and in different capacities, but could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in your district? Because I've learned about what that looks like in the city of Baltimore and in Baltimore County, but I'm not too familiar with what the disparities are between Anne Arundel and Prince George's County.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Environment and Transportation Committee, as the name suggests, deals with everything under the sun having to do with the environment. So water, air, land, animals, hunting, fishing, natural resource issues, but also transportation. So anything that comes under the Motor Vehicle Administration, trains, planes, automobiles, pedestrian, safety for pedestrians, sidewalks, bicycles. But that it also has housing, and you wouldn't know that from the title, but we have a housing subcommittee that I've been on now this is my 5th year. So I've done a number of housing bills over the years, and I have another bill this year I'll tell you about briefly. But there are two pressing issues right now with housing. One is the lack of affordable housing, and it really is reached a crisis statewide. It's been a problem in Prince George's for a number of years, and that's because we had an affordable housing law back in the 90s that got repealed, and we didn't replace it. So we not only weren't building new affordable units, we were losing the affordable units we had when they would be put on the market. When multifamily housing was put on the market, it would be snatched up, and new owners would slap on a coat of paint and maybe plant a few new shrubs and then hike up the rent. So, but it's a challenge everywhere, increasingly so. And then there are a lot of challenges with renters' rights, and that was exacerbated obviously during the pandemic. So I've done a number of bills to help renters and to kind of hold landlords' feet to the fire when they attempt to evict people without being licensed. And that is a problem in the 6 bigger counties in the state. six biggest counties, I should say, in Baltimore City, where those jurisdictions require landlords to have a license to be able to rent, but sometimes they don't. And I want to emphasize most landlords are good and decent and trying to do the right thing, but we have some, bad actors. And so I've had a bill for, I guess, 3 years now. It started out as a local bill just trying to address licensing at Anne Arundel and Prince George's. And then I was advised to expand it statewide. So I did a bill last year with Senator Heddleman, who is from Baltimore County, you might know her name, to say that if a landlord moves to evict someone for failure to pay rent or what's called tenant holding over past their lease, or a breach of lease situation where a tenant violates some rule, like say they bring too many people into the unit or bring a pet or, do something that they're not supposed to do. If a landlord's going to evict under any of those scenarios, but they are renting in a jurisdiction that requires a license, they have to first show the court that they have a license. And the idea is that you can't evict someone if you're not renting legally in the first place. So the bill did pass last year, the House and the Senate, but Governor Hogan vetoed it, believing, I think mistakenly, that it was going to somehow disproportionately hurt small landlords. So that bill is back this year, and I had the hearing like the second week of session in the House Judiciary Committee. Some housing bills, or tenants' rights bills and eviction bills, do go to judiciary instead of my committee, and this was one of them. So it is pending. We do expect it to pass again with strong support of legal aid and other organizations that work to safeguard tenants. So I'm pretty proud of that. On the environmental front, I've had bills to try to address stormwater, runoff, controlling flooding. I have a floodplain ordinance bill that would require MDE to update and write a new model floodplain ordinance for the state. And it would also require counties to adopt their own ordinances within 2 years. Because as you know, and I assume your audience, I hope most of them know, if not all, that climate change is very real. It's a serious risk to the whole world, but it's really a risk in Maryland because Maryland is a very low-lying state, especially the Eastern Shore, and Maryland is very susceptible to sea level rise. And so those, that ordinance around, flooding, taking into account climate change and sea level rise, to have, stronger laws around where development is allowed to occur, or if it occurs, what kind of, siting or design standards that developers need to apply to recognize that maybe they're building in a sensitive area prone to flooding. Maybe a building needs to be elevated, needs to be built like you see sometimes along the coast, like in Carolina and Delaware and elsewhere. You might see a housing that is up on stilts, right, to protect it from flooding, or where the lowest level is not a level that is meant to be inhabited. It could be like, say, a garage or a storage space, but you don't want bedrooms and living space on the lowest level in a flood-prone area, things like that. And so that bill has not been heard yet, but will be next week. I've done a lot of animal bills because animals are near and dear to me. And we have had an issue, like a lot of states, with a lot of unwanted animals, cats and dogs, in our county shelters. And when they can't be adopted, they end up euthanized. And so, and nobody wants to see that. So I took a law that my predecessor, Delegate Frushcott, passed in 2013 and got it reauthorized, and it provides low-cost spay and neuter services for pet owners. And we just reauthorized that last year for another 10 years. And this year I have a bill to grow the spay and neuter fund that provides grants to those county shelters and other nonprofits to do the spaying and neutering, because we don't want more unwanted, kittens and puppies that then end up in shelters at risk of, needing to be adopted. And you hope they are, but some just don't get adopted. And then they have to be put down. And it's such a travesty. So I've tried to protect cats and dogs and other animals, and protect our natural resources, and it's just the honor of a lifetime. I, love being on this committee. The issues are very important to me, and they're equally important to the residents of Prince George's and Anne Arundel. Anne Arundel in particular, is borders and has the Chesapeake Bay, beside it. And that, of course, is kind of the heartbeat of our state. It is a huge economic driver. It provides a lot of jobs with tourism and fishing and boating and crabbing. So we have to do everything we can to protect the health of the Bay. And I've been honored to try and help do that and improve the overall water quality in the Bay.
Yes, and thank you again for sharing the fantastic work that you're doing on the committee. And I think that oftentimes this work does not get recognized enough because, again, a lot of people don't really understand the work that goes into passing these bills behind the scenes. People just oftentimes look at the finished product without looking at the work that it really takes in order to get these bills passed. So I thank you for sharing that. And in addition to that, I wanted to share with the listeners, anybody who's new listening, that I've studied sociology at UMBC and at CCBC with under both programs. When I studied for both of my degrees at the associate's level and at the bachelor's level, I studied sociology. And sociology, again, a lot of the stuff that you described is a lot of the stuff that I studied while I was in school. And in addition to that, I have a social dimensions of health certificate. So I know a lot about what the health related disparities are in different marginalized communities. I've been able to learn about that in the classroom, in a virtual space, of course, and also with like my internship experience, and even within my new job. I'm about to start next week. I'm about to start my new job at the Carroll County Health Department. So I've been able to really work in different capacities and learn about a lot of the issues that you just put on the table in terms of what the marginalized communities are subjected to more often than others. So again, I thank you for sharing that. And my next question is, why do you think it's very important for the community to educate themselves about the legislative process at the state level? And because again, oftentimes people don't do their homework. Oftentimes people just look at the finished product, and they may not know again the work that is involved and how much work you have to put forth into making these things come to fruition. So why do you think it's important for the constituents, not just in your district, but throughout the state, at the local and state level? Why do you think it's important for them to be involved in the legislative process and out in the community?
Absolutely, that is a great question. So, I would say first of all, and it's so great to hear that you're going to be interviewing Delegate Pena Melnick. You will love her; she is just amazing. But one of the first things that she told to me when I worked for her, which was for 3 years between 2007 and 2010, was that the best bill ideas actually often come from citizens. And that's because, people are living their lives, raising families, going to work, being involved in their neighborhoods or their kids' schools, and they see things and they experience things that are, that sometimes are wrong or just have end badly or are challenging or frustrating. And they end up saying, isn't there a law for this? Or why isn't there a law for this? Or maybe they find out there is a law, but it's out of date. It's, the law was passed 20 or 30 or more years ago, and it hasn't been revisited, and it's time to revisit it and maybe make it stronger. And so, if your audience is experiencing any issue, whether it's something around their employment or their housing, their neighborhood, their kids' school, whether it's public safety or the environment, the citizens have such an important role to play in government. This is a representative democracy, so it's government of, by, and for the people. And ideas, concerns, problems often give rise to legislative solutions. And so we want to hear about those challenges and help citizens figure out, is there a law for whatever this issue might involve? Is sometimes there is no law. And other times there's a law that's outdated, or or just needs to be expanded or modernized, whatever it might be. And again, we citizens are kind of our eyes and ears. Lawmakers don't, have the market or the corner on ideas. So interest groups bring us ideas, individual citizens do. It could be a labor union or a business, or you name it, a community organization, a PTA. And it's worth stepping forward and saying, I think I have an idea, or I have a problem. What is the solution? Can you help me find the solution? And citizens provide great ideas, great input. If they come forward with a problem and a proposed solution, we're gonna engage them. I am. Most of my colleagues do, and say, we'd love your help with this, to figure out what the solution is, and then to have you testify, on the bill. Help us shape the bill, figure out how to resolve this issue or address this issue you've brought forward, and then come tell your story. Come to the committee and tell your story about why this became a problem, how this got on your radar, and what you would like to see the legislature do about it. So I think citizens are just critical to this process. And because a lawmaker is not going to sit in front of, like I did today, on an electric vehicle charging bill that I'm working with a colleague from Howard County on, Delegate Terraza, and just say, well, this is what I think. This is my view of the world. Like, I drive an EV. Everyone else wants to drive one. You can speak to your own life experience, but you're trying to make the case for a lot of people, and for the state, and what its overall goals are. In the case of electric vehicles, we have a goal and passed legislation last year, the Climate Solutions Now Act, to say these are our goals to get to, net zero greenhouse gas emissions by a date certain. And because transportation is one of the leading contributors, I think it is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions, we have these goals to convert our car, fleet over time. It's going to take years, but to go to completely electric vehicles, from our gasoline powered cars that most of us are driving now. And so electric vehicle infrastructure is important to helping people to own EVs, because if you have nowhere to plug in your electric vehicle, you're not going to buy one. And people spend a lot of time at home, more now than they did actually before COVID, because more and more people work from home. They had to during COVID, and some have never gone back and never will go back to, a traditional work setting. Others work hybrid, where they go in a few days a week, but spend at least part of the week in their home. And so if that's the case, they need a place to charge. And, again, that can be my opinion, and I can try to make that case, but I'm going to need help making the case from other interested groups, whether they're environmental groups, whether it is electricians, like a representative from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, testified in favor of this bill today, because for them that means jobs. More EV infrastructure means more of their electricians will be employed, but they are also citizens. So the representative of IBEW who testified, actually, I met him down here in Annapolis because of his job with IBEW, but it turns out he grew up in Prince George's County and knows a lot of the people that I know, because we're around the same age and grew up, not too far from each other. And so it really is a small world, but we so need citizen engagement and involvement. It makes us better at what we do, and it makes for a better process, legislatively speaking, to get that input, to have that balance of, different people and their life perspectives and their personal stories. And I will just end by saying that in my time on the council, in my 8 years on the council, and now in my 5th session, 5 years in Annapolis, there is nothing that lawmakers sort of enjoy more and get more from than hearing people's personal stories about why they support something and why it would make a difference in their life, to their family, in their workplace, in their neighborhood. That's what really resonates with legislators. We hear from a lot of experts, from paid lobbyists, from academic, types, and people with other expertise. But really, it's more often than not, I think your average citizens, often school kids, they're a favorite down here too, for kids to come and sort of talk about why they feel strongly about an issue, whether it's, safer streets in their community and sidewalks or places to walk or bike or global warming or whatever it might be that they're passionate about. That really, really resonates with lawmakers.
Yes, yes, and thank you again for sharing that and elaborating on that. And I tell that to people all the time. I always encourage people to not only get out and vote, but also be involved on a consistent basis, with what's going on in your community, because the only way that you're really going to figure out what's going on is, to educate yourself about the issues that are prevalent. Oftentimes, people are under the assumption that because of a legislator's influence, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or at the federal level, because of a legislator's influence, a lot of people just assume that a legislator just has the authority to say, this bill stays and this bill goes. But people don't understand what really goes into everything. People just think that the legislators can just wave a magic wand and just make things happen. But it's much more than that. And people don't really understand how much they have the power. Because I tell people all the time, that we as constituents, we have the power, we have the authority to vote about what we want and what we don't want. We have the ability to come forward and speak about our concerns. And it's a legislator's responsibility to take heed to that and then, follow up with some action. But again, I'm glad that you shared that, because I think that constituents need to be in a safe space with their legislators so that they can feel comfortable with, coming to them about many of the issues that are taking place in their communities and that they are passionate about and that they do care about. And I'm glad that you were able to, speak about that, because I think that, in order to bridge that gap between the constituents and legislators, again, there has to be some trust there between the community and between the legislator. Again, the constituents have to feel as though they trust their legislator. And of course, you're not going to please every single person, but I
Yeah.
think, but the people who are really, really passionate about the issues that are taking place, and the people who are really serious about making a difference and who are serious about making a change, the people are going to show up and be involved. So I'm glad that you were able to share that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. If I could just say really quickly, my mother, bless her heart, I talked about her influence on my life. We lost her last year, about a week before her 90th birthday. She passed away, but you know, she was a great believer in, in saying that, everybody knows something that you don't know, and you need to respect that. And that includes, the custodian in your building, or the door person. She grew up in the city where there were doormen and elevator people. Everyone you meet in your life knows something that you do not, regardless of their level of education or their background, their upbringing. And you need to recognize that and be open to other people and their ideas and whatever their expertise is. Legislators do not know everything, not even the half of it, and we can't be everywhere, and we certainly do not have expertise on every issue. We develop expertise typically in most legislatures, especially more so, I think, at the state level than I would have said so at the county level, because it's a committee-driven system. So you develop expertise, for example, for me, in environment and transportation and housing issues. But because I'm not sitting on those other committees, I don't know nearly as much about, say, health or mental health, except what I learn or what I know through my own life experience or my family's experience. But I'm not day in and day out hearing healthcare bills or mental health care bills, or for members of what we call our money committees, which are appropriations and ways and means. I don't develop the level of expertise in the budget or on tax policy that my colleagues on those committees are able to are able to sort of experience, because day in and day out, week in and week out, that's the legislation they're presented with. So that's why we are looking to, other people, to our constituents, to family, to friends, whoever comes with us with legislative ideas. And the other thing I want to say quickly is I realize not everyone can come down here and testify or get really involved in legislation to the degree, where they're, say, testifying, or even, maybe contacting a legislator to say, I have a bill idea. But that doesn't mean they cannot follow the process. And in fact, we encourage them to email us, to call us, to write to us and say, I support this bill, or I'm against this bill, or I would like to learn more information about such and such a bill. I think, my opinion might be useful to you because I've experienced, whatever that issue might be, whether it's a health issue or mental health issue, a housing issue. That sort of personal perspective and experience is really valuable for us to know. And of course, we are trying our best to represent our constituents and reflect what they would do, what they would like to see us do. And so we have to be open to their ideas, to their support or their opposition for legislation, or maybe it's a budget issue they care about. And so we're looking for that kind of input too. And it has been made easier, the involvement in the legislative process, I will just say, since COVID, because for 2 sessions, we did just about everything virtually, and or at least our floor debates and votes had to be in person, and that was a decision that was arrived at by our former Attorney General, looking at the state constitution, saying you must meet in person on the floor, but for committees and subcommittees, you can hear those bills virtually. So we did that for 2 sessions, where all of the hearings were by Zoom, and so of course, you'd have to have access to a computer. But that really opened up the opportunity for more citizens to testify, people that would have had a hard time driving to Annapolis, because getting here is not easy, especially if you don't own a car. Finding parking is challenging. And this year, and I'm very pleased by this, on the House side, we have kept our bill hearings hybrid, where you can come in person and speak, or you can still testify virtually on camera. And so that's been great, I think, for the process, because it allows a lot more people to be able to be engaged and involved and to testify, who otherwise might not be able to take off work and come down here, might not have access to transportation. So that's a good thing, and I think we will continue to do that going forward.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you for sharing that. And again, these are just ways the ways in which the constituents, the people in the community, can be a part of the process. You can be a part of the process virtually or in person. So we have a lot of options nowadays where we can come in person or participate virtually. And again, we all have a story to share. We all have something special to bring to the table. We all have something valuable. So I also want to put this out there. I want everyone to know that you should never be afraid to share your story or to share your opinion when we're talking about ways to make a difference, and when we're talking about ways in which we can make a change. There's really no right or wrong answer to
Yeah.
bringing anything to the forefront, as long as, of course, you're willing to put in the work and make the sacrifice in order to make sure that these changes come to fruition. You can have a team of people, a community of people who are willing to help you with that. So that was something valuable that I've shared before in the past, and I'm glad that you kind of reiterated that. So you already answered a couple more questions, but my next question is, I think one of my last questions, I should say, is what advice would you give to young people who want to enter into public service or the field of politics at the local, state, or federal level? And I asked that question because I graduated with a lot of my friends and classmates graduated, and they have had internships with legislators at the state, local, and federal level. Some of them are pursuing careers as lawyers. Some of them study not just sociology, but also psychology, political science, and other social sciences, and they've been able to work with legislators as interns, and some of them have gotten jobs on a full-time basis as aides or as chief of staffs and so forth. So what advice would you give to young people who want to enter into this field? Because I know that this work is very challenging. It's rewarding, but it's very challenging to really sacrifice a lot, for the constituents on a day-to-day basis. So what advice would you give?
Excellent question. First, I want to make one more point about legislation. To your earlier point that it's more complicated than it looks. It is, and it's not, in the sense of if you have a good idea and you have a solid basis of support. What I would say is that it often takes longer than people think to get a bill passed. And I think that's especially true here at the state level. It's even more true at the federal level, that sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 sessions. And it can be frustrating because we're only in session 90 days a year. But that is a widely held belief down here. The best bills take a few years to get passed. But you can't give up. If it indeed is a good piece of legislation and there's strong support for it, you're going to get it done. And in the process, you're going to have to, work it and compromise and be open to suggestions and changes. But in terms of getting involved, I think, especially for young people, I would say this for anyone, even if someone is a career changer and has always been interested in politics and public policy. In my view, starting local makes the most sense. And why do I say that? Because there's an old saying, but there really is a lot of truth to it, which is all politics is local. And there's a funny story, and you may or may not have heard this famous story about a former U.S. Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, Tip O'Neill. And he was legendary. He was from Massachusetts, from the Boston area. And he told this story where he ran for the first time he ran for Congress. He did not succeed. And he was talking to his neighbor, and he had lived in the same neighborhood, this Irish neighborhood outside of Boston his whole life, and knew a lot of his neighbors because he had grown up in this same area, and it was a very tight-knit community. And he was talking to his neighbor across the street, I forget her name, something very Irish, and, was kind of bemoaning the fact that he did not win, his first election. And she said, well, I didn't vote for you. He was kind of feeling sorry for himself. And she looked him right in the eye and said, well, I want to tell you something. I didn't vote for you. And he was like shocked and said, what do you mean you didn't vote for me? Like, you've known me my whole life. You know who I am. You know what I stand for. And she said, yeah, but you never asked me. You never asked me for my vote. You never asked me. And it was true. He had not. He had just assumed she was going to support him because she knew him. But the things that people care about are primarily, yes, they care about taxes and they care about, big issues, more and more, obviously global warming, right? It feels huge. It's like, how are we going to tackle this? There are those big issues. But the bread and butter issues have always been, and I think, probably always will be, the things that hit closest to home for people. So how safe people feel in their neighborhoods, how good their local schools are, how clean their streets are. Does the trash get picked up, when it's supposed to, once or twice a week? Does the snow get plowed within a few hours after a storm so people can go to the grocery store or go to the pharmacy and get their medicine or go to work? Those are the things that you need to at least be aware of, if not get engaged in, if you have any interest in politics. You don't, and whether that's working for someone else, volunteering as a start, or interning, or working, it's pretty unusual to start all the way up at the very top, working, say, for a U.S. senator or the president. Some people spend their whole lives in local government, in local elected office, and local government. And those are good jobs. I mean, they don't pay as much as the private sector, but they are interesting. There's job security. There's decent pay. There's great benefits. There's a pension. But more to the point, going back to what people care about, they care about those local issues, and they want to know that people that represent them care about them. Even I, more often than not, even though I'm working on these statewide issues, if I get stopped in my community, back in my district, at the grocery store, at my kids' school when they were in school. My youngest now is in college, but I have 4 children that, went to local public schools. So when people would stop me to talk to me, it was about a school issue. It was about a neighbor's dog that barked all night. It was about the fact that, the week before or 2 weeks before when it last snowed, that it took, too long to have the street plowed. It was about the cracked sidewalk in front of their house, or things like that, that really impact people's quality of life. So that is so important. And getting involved locally, whether that's in your neighborhood civic association or some kind of neighborhood, community improvement group, is just so important. I can't emphasize that enough. And being a good listener, because again, like I said about legislators, we not only don't have all the answers, we often don't even know what the problems are. So when someone wants to stop you and say, even if you're the person living next door and you have some interest in public service, and say, I've always wondered, why does our street not even have street lights? Like, do people like it that way? And I'm bringing up a really real issue in my neighborhood. When I first moved to West Laurel, 30 plus years ago, the first thing I noticed was there were no street lights. And I said to the neighbors, why do we have no street lights? Don't people want street lights? Like, isn't it a safety issue? And to my shock, my neighbors were kind of horrified and said, no, we don't want street lights. We like being able to see the stars. I thought that was so odd, because I grew up in a municipality in Greenbelt where all the streets are lit. But so being involved locally, engaging with your neighbors and other people, I just think is so important. And then the final thing I would say is I'm really excited, although I don't know a lot of the details yet, about our new governor, Wes Moore's proposal for a year of service for young people who are, open to the idea of public service, maybe are interested but don't know where to get started. Maybe they don't come from a family where anyone has worked in public service in, for local government or community organizations. So I think that's an amazing idea and a great opportunity for young people. I can't wait to hear more about specifically what Governor Moore has in mind.
Yes, and thanks again for appearing on my show and speaking about your work in the Maryland General Assembly, and in the Maryland House of Delegates specifically. So my last question before we wrap up the show is how can the listeners get in touch with you if they have any questions or concerns about the work that you do on the committee, or if they live in District 21, or if they have an issue that they want to bring forth to you and your colleagues in your office? How can they contact you?
Absolutely. And I would love to hear their ideas and feedback. So my landline in Annapolis is 301-858-3114. And my email address is my first name, Mary, Mary, .Lehman, my last name, Leh, M like Mary, A, N like Nancy. So Mary.Lehman at house.state.md.us. And even when we're not here in session, we monitor our phones year round. We're not in the office physically very often, not more than about once a week after the session ends in April, but we monitor our phones, our messages, and we read email, obviously, year round. And I would love to hear from people, whether it's feedback on 2023 bills, my bills, other bills coming to my committee, or that will eventually, if they get out of committee, make their way to the House floor, or ideas for bills for next session. It's never too early to be thinking about next year. Trust me, because this work goes on year round. We don't, start it in January and end it in April. We work at it year round.
Yes. Thanks again for sharing that, and thank you for appearing on my show as a guest, and thank you for speaking about the work that you do in the field of housing and in transportation, as well as the environmental related bills on the committee. Thanks again for your service, and thanks again for sharing your work. It's much appreciated. I've learned a lot about Anne Arundel and Prince George's County by just sitting and listening to you. And I will be speaking to a couple of more of your colleagues in the coming months. So I'm looking forward to that. Before I let you go, I just wanted to thank you for your time and thank you for your service and thank you for the work that you do for District 21.
Thank you so much. It really was an honor. It was a lot of fun. I hope to come back sometime and let you know what happened with my bills. And if you have the ability to do it, it would be great to be able to take some of your listener questions, whether that's, through a chat or phone calls. This was just a lot of fun. So, and thank you for the good you're doing with this program.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, Delegate Lehman. I will, keep in touch and I will touch base about everything.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
And take care. Okay, so that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. Women's History Month is next week, starting on March 7th, 2023, from 6 to 7 p.m. So make an appointment to meet me back here on March 7th, 2023, from 6 to 7 p.m. I might show a rerun show. I'm still getting some stuff together. I start a new job again at the Carroll County Health Department next week. So I'm getting things ready this week for this new role and this new position. So I might have a rerun next week. I might post a show from a previous broadcast next week because it's going to be really busy for me next week, getting adjusted and acclimated to this new role and this new position. But I want to thank you all again for your time. I want to thank you all again for tuning into my show. I want to thank you all again for your support and your encouragement and your love. I don't take that for granted. I take all of it seriously. It's important for us to have these types of conversations at the local, state, and federal level. It's important for us to be involved. It's important for us to be a part of the process because we are the ones that have the power. We are the ones that can help make the decisions. So we all have a story. We all live, work, and play in our communities, and we all raise our families in our communities. We all have churches in our communities, senior centers, schools, people, and places that we care about. So it's important for us to, again, be in touch with our legislators and speak to them about the issues that matter to us and that are important. So I just want you all to keep that in mind. So I hope that this conversation was informative for everybody who was listening. So I will definitely touch base with you guys. And again, next week we start Women's History Month. I might show a rerun show, but I will keep you guys posted. So again, this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Awesome God Radio. Make sure that you follow us on all of the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, we're on it. Make sure you follow me at Nelson E. Brown on Instagram, on Twitter, and at Nelson Brown on LinkedIn and on Facebook. So again, this is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I will see you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye.